Hey, you want to know the most important shape in tattooing? It's right here. Huh? See where I'm going? Hey, welcome to the Fireside. My name is Jake, and this is 3 Minutes to Better Tattooing. Did you notice that I'm like smuggling raisins today? It's cold in here. Gonna have to rate this episode PG-13, I think. All right, so the most important shape in tattooing. Let's go ahead and get into it since we only have 3 minutes. It is obviously the area that you are designing to, the area of the body that you're designing your tattoo for, and whether that is allowing for other tattoos that are in the same area or just for the unique shape of that person's body. Everyone's body is shaped differently. So it's difficult when you're just building pre-made designs and trying to slap them down on some area where the client wants their tattoo without really thinking through how the design is going to sit on the skin. I've got a great example today that will illustrate my point. So let's hop over to it. So I had a new client come in that wanted body armor over their shoulder, kind of a half sleeve of body armor. And your tendency or your first instinct would be just to draw a symmetrical piece of body armor and slap it onto their arm, or at least mine would have been in years past. So I pulled up here kind of the photo that I have of Joe, of my client, and then just a very symmetrical kind of simple armor shape. And what becomes obvious kind of right off the start here is that Joe's body has a very unique kind of shape. His deltoid and his tricep are very pronounced. So what would happen if I just set this design directly on Joe's arm, because his arm is more kind of rounded or bulbous on this side, and then also very rounded and bulbous on this side, what we would find is that this line would tend to round and this line would tend to straighten out. Even more pronounced, these lines on the front of his deltoid would look very round. These lines would look very flat. These would start to flatten out. So you would take a symmetrical shape and place it over an imperfect surface, and it would tend to look really wonky and warped and like you didn't draw it correctly. So by using, on the other hand, let me go to another photo of Joe here. So by using the natural shape of Joe's body, I'm able to actually really simplify my design process. The unique shape of his body will guide the way that I need to lay these shapes out. So it's even more obvious, I think, without the other design laying on top of it, just kind of the unique shape of Joe's arm. His deltoid here actually sits very far forward, and the back of his shoulder is pretty flat. Likewise, his tricep is very round, but as it moves towards his bicep, it tends to flatten out. So he's got a very round shape here and a very round shape here, and flat shapes here and flat shapes here, right? So I can use that to my advantage, but I can't do that. I can't use it to my advantage unless I accurately map the body. See, I first was going to make this episode for our Fireside Simplify students, people who are taking our new course, Fireside Simplify, where we talk a lot about mapping the body. And in Simplify, we talk about how to identify landmarks like the front and back of the armpit, the bone of this bone of the shoulder blade that sits right here, obviously the elbow and the bend of the arm. But something just as important, if not more important, to allow for is the unique kind of terrain of that person's body. So in making a body map for Joe, let me go back and I'll show you the actual body map that I made for him. This was it. So you can see that it's a very unique kind of map. It is, let me add a new layer here. It allows for, this is the bone on the top of his shoulder. This is the front of his armpit. This is the back of his armpit, right? His deltoid is very pronounced on the front here. And then I also drew where his trap kind of comes in and connects to his deltoid. So this is very round. This is round, but this tends to flatten out. So you can see how this line kind of flattens out and how the back side of his shoulder kind of has this shape. Look at how different this shape is from this shape, right? If I would draw something symmetrical to go on each side, there's no way that it would look symmetrical. One would look flat and one would look round. Then I also drew the shape of his tricep, the ball of his tricep, and indicated it right here that it's a tricep. I marked his elbow like you normally would. So all of my traditional kind of landmarks that we talk about in the Simplify course are there, but I identified these very unique characteristics that only Joe's arm has, which allowed me to draw my shapes of the armor to fit his arm perfectly. It doesn't complicate things. It actually makes things more simple. It makes it easier because I know the shapes that I'm drawing to, which tells me the shapes that I'm drawing. So let me go through and I'll show you what I did in this mock-up for Joe. This was my kind of first preliminary sketch for this tattoo, and you can see that I used the exact curves in his arm, on his deltoid, right here. I used the ball of his tricep right here, and I flattened out where his arm tends to flatten out. I flattened all of these shapes. They're not as round, they're stretched out, right? So these are very stretched to match the kind of flat shape of the back of his arm. This is very rounded to match how his deltoid kind of sits forward. His entire deltoid sits forward like that. And then the same thing on his bicep, I did flatter, more sweeping shapes, whereas on his tricep, I did these more rounded shapes to follow his tricep. Made it incredibly easy. The unique features, the unique kind of terrain of his arm made it incredibly easy to draw to. So I'll pull up here and show you the finished piece. And some of this is healed and some of it is fresh. How do I go from piece to piece? Okay. So some of this is healed and some of it is fresh. The line work I came in and kind of bumped back through, but you can see how this just fits perfectly on Joe's arm. We wrapped right to the bottom of his bicep. We kind of used, the strongest shadow shapes right on his deltoid right there, and then kind of repeated those shapes just to give a little more kind of visual interest. And then you can see on the back, the tricep kind of area being rounded, and then how it's kind of flat wrapping over his shoulder to match the terrain of his body kind of back here. And so I'd encourage you, if you're not already doing it, to get in the habit of making very accurate body maps, just using tracing paper and Sharpies or whatever it is that you like to use. Some people like to use plastic wrap, saran wrapped. I know some people use contact paper so it kind of tacks to the skin, but it's hard just going by photographs alone to know what that terrain really looks like. It's important that you get an accurate map and draw to the map itself. I'm going to show you one last example of a piece that I'm working on right now that I didn't get a chance to do a full body map, and I had to draw from the photos, and you'll see where the shortcomings were. So this was a sketch that I did for my friend and client Tim, and I drew it just with this front kind of facing photograph. Now what happened, because I wasn't able to allow for the actual terrain of his body, particularly his stomach, so what happened is I ended up with all of this area through here that I didn't get to fill. I thought that this was going to wrap further around than it actually did. Same thing on this side. It's actually even worse on his right side. I thought, based on my sketch from the photograph, that this wing was going to sit much further over here. And there were these eggs that sat over in my sketch back there. There were these eggs that were supposed to sit over on this side, and they really only sat right in the front. So I ended up kind of leaving them out and having to do two separate drawings to fill this area and the same area on the other side. And I had to lay those in a second sitting because I wasn't prepared in the first sitting. If I had mapped the body correctly from the start, I wouldn't have had that problem. I would have been much more efficient. I would have gotten all the line work done in one sitting instead of having to come back in a second sitting, do a secondary drawing and lay stencils again. So that put us almost a full session behind because I wasn't prepared. So that's it. What I hope to encourage you to do is map the body accurately and think of it as an asset and not as an extra step or another problem to solve in the tattoo. Whenever you are mapping the body accurately, it actually makes your life much easier when it comes time to design. And if you are pre-making designs and just slapping them on people, I ask you at least to consider small things that you can do to make your pre-made designs relate to the shape of the person once you find out where it's going. So for example, if you're doing Sacred Hearts and they want it on their, you've drawn it round where it might sit on a deltoid and they want it on their forearm, maybe you could look at shifting the shape of the heart. It's really easy to do these days with Procreate or with Photoshop, where you can warp and mesh and kind of manipulate the overall shape of the design. So try to think about that. Sometimes it takes just a really minimal effort to make something relate to the person's body a little bit better. You can just stretch it or warp it slightly slightly so that it works better with surrounding tattoos or fits that shape of their body a little bit better. And remember, it's worth that little bit of extra effort. These things are forever, and that's our jobs, to make them look as best as we can. Thank you guys, as always, for supporting what we do, and I will catch you in the next episode.